Hello and welcome to this Authors in Conversation panel featuring the 2025 Minnesota Book Award finalists for the genre fiction category. The Minnesota Book Awards is a program of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library in the organization's capacity as the Minnesota Center for the Book. This year's book awards are sponsored by Education Minnesota, and the genre category is sponsored by Macalester College. My name is Emma Torzs. I am a novelist and a professor at Macalester College, and I am also the winner of last year's 2024 genre fiction category for my debut novel, Ink, Blood, Sister, Scribe. For this latest installment of the Minnesota Book Awards Meet the Finalists series, I am pleased to be joined by Sally Franson, author of Big in Sweden, published by Mariner Books, HarperCollins Publishers. Lindsay Starck, author of Monsters We Have Made, published by Vintage Books, Penguin Random House. And Wendy Webb, author of The Witches of Santo Stefano, published by Lake Union Publishing, Amazon Publishing. Congratulations to each of you for the Minnesota Book Award finalist nod. In the interest of making the most of our short time together, I'm going to begin with a round robin question that I'd like each of you to respond to in turn, and then I will have two questions specific to each of you and your wonderful finalist book. I'm wondering, so this is the genre fiction category. And so for my first question, I am curious what genre you would classify your books in and whether you were thinking about genre as you were writing these books.
Yes and no. I don't really think about genre very much. I just sort of tell the story that I want to tell, and it kind of plays out as I type it out. Most of my books are categorized as Gothic suspense. But this one isn't. It's more of a magical realism, I think. It's a little more, the language is a little more beautiful. It's not sort of the unrelenting dread of, the end of Temperance Dare or some of my other novels. It's kind of magical and lovely and a little more beautiful.
Thanks, Emma. I'm so happy to be here. This is a challenging question. I definitely was not thinking about genre when writing. I was just thinking about character and image and sentences. But I would say there are elements of thriller, there's elements of mystery, there are even some elements of horror, although I would hesitate to call it a horror novel. I'm afraid to read horror and I don't see it that way, but I've heard it's scary. I know what happens in the end, so it's not as scary for me. But it's also a love story, it's a romance, it's a family drama, it's a quest narrative. So it has a little bit of everything, but probably sort of mystery thriller if I had to choose one category. But yeah, come for the monster, stay for the love story.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Let's knock it over to Sally.
Hi, thanks so much for hosting this, Emma. Thanks so much to the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. I love this question because Big in Sweden is my second novel, and for the first time in my writing career, I actually thought very consciously about genre. With my first book, my genre was my feelings. And I feel like with my second book, Big in Sweden, I really purposely wanted to write a comic novel. And so I read a bunch of comic novels as I was prepping for it. And I, made sure with my publisher that every time it went out, it was being positioned in that way because I think genre is so important. You want people to know what they're signing up for. I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. And of course, you also want them to be surprised along the way. So there are elements of romance in my book as well, but I would never call it a romance just because romances in my writing tend to be the B or C plot, not sort of the driving force. This is more of a fish out of water travel log or quest journey story. So yes, I hope it makes people laugh. The great thing and terrible thing about a comic novel is that, if people aren't laughing, then you haven't fulfilled the terms of the genre. So mileage may vary, but I hope it makes readers laugh.
Okay, I'm going to ask you some more specific questions now, each one of you, about your books. And the first question, Sally, is for you. Big in Sweden is a fictional novel about an actual real reality TV show that exists in our world, Alt för Sverige, which sees, American contestants with Swedish heritage traveling to Sweden to participate in Swedish contests. And I am wondering, like, what were the challenges and maybe the pleasures of writing something fictional, not only about something real, but specifically about a televised medium? You're writing a book about TV, and I'm just really curious about what you found pleasurable, what you found challenging. Yeah, tell us about that.
Such a great question, Emma. Definitely something that I learned a lot about as I went. Like Emma said, I wrote the book after filming this actual TV show in Sweden. And at first I was like, oh, this is going to be like a real one-to-one, like I'm going to have the easiest time writing this book, like I had this experience, but it ended up being much different than that in the sense that, fiction is not real life. And I don't even think it's a mirror of real life. I think it's like an intensifying and clarifying sort of dream of real life. And so it took a lot of work to and a lot of time for my imagination to take over my memories. And I worked on the book for over 2 years and I filmed for only 5 weeks. So luckily I had that time to really reflect. And then I would say one of the hardest things that I had to do for readers is to kind of talk them through like the production process of filming reality TV, which I find really interesting. I found it very strange to be a part of. And I wanted to convey kind of the surreality of that as a person going through it to readers. So there was a lot of mechanical stuff that I felt like I had to include, like things like walking shots, how much time happens between takes, sort of the scripted lines that they feed you, like how much you're kind of doing the sort of confessionals, like one-on-one with the camera, and how much you're doing these sort of group scenes. So that was technical, and I would say that was very fun, but I felt like it was really my job as a writer because I wanted the experience to be as immersive for a reader as it was for me as a reality TV show contestant. And hopefully, when readers walk away, they have a better sense, of how these shows are filmed and, the good and the bad things about that process.
Excellent. Thank you, Sally. Next question is for you, Lindsay. And I will say, normally I don't like to ask questions about titles, simply because I know that titles are not always like the author's choice necessarily. But I really love the title of your book, Monsters We Have Made. And I do think that it telegraphs like two of the book's central preoccupations in some way, which is monstrosity and motherhood. And so I'm wondering about your thinking specifically around how motherhood and monstrosity intertwine and how you went into writing this book with those two things on your mind.
Thank you. I'm really glad you liked the title. It was an early title, but then it felt really wordy, so I kept trying to change it and come up with something else, and I never did. So it stuck. Monsters We Have Made. And yeah, if you read the novel, you see there are all kinds of monsters and monstrosities, and sometimes they're real and sometimes they're metaphorical. But I think the relationship between motherhood or parenthood and monsters plays out in a couple different ways. Maybe the most obvious is that, parents sort of bring forth a new creature or being into the world without any clear sense or knowledge of what that being will become. And the sort of mystery and uncertainty of that was something I wanted to explore. There's also kind of a literal monster in the novel who inspires this crime. These two young girls commit this crime for the sake of this fictional monster. And the crime itself is monstrous, but I think the protagonist, Sylvia, who's the mother of one of these girls, what she's grappling with is the guilt of being the parent of someone who did this thing. And she's looking, spending so much time looking back, trying to figure out where she went wrong. And she feels monstrous, so much guilt and so much remorse that this person she loved more than anyone else in the world is now lost to her because she maybe wasn't paying attention or wasn't there when her daughter needed her. And so, she feels, so the monstrosity of kind of that guilt and that desire to go back and change things. if she could. There's that as well. And then I think one of my favorite lines in the book, I can't remember now who said it because it took me 7 years to write the novel and many drafts. And I liked this line, so I gave it to different characters at different times. So I don't know who ended up with it, but someone says something like, maybe in the end, love turns us all into monsters. And I think this relationship between love and monsters is also really important. And I think, especially sort of a powerful love that compels us, that has us cross boundaries, that has us do things we wouldn't otherwise do and look back and wonder who that person was who did those things. When we would go to sort of any lengths for someone we love, like, what does that make us? What does that mean? So I think that's one of the big questions of the novel too. It's like, yeah, what is it, what does it mean to love someone who does something terrible? And what is the responsibility of love? What are the boundaries of love? When does someone go too far? So all of those questions for me are kind of knotted up together. And but I think, yeah, many monsters, many different ways to read it. And then of course the king man, the actual monster who lurks in the North Woods and lives on the North Shore. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that answer. I'm wondering specifically for you, Wendy, how you came up with the idea of this book, and once you had the idea, how you brought it into being. How did it go from idea into a full novel?
Well, that's kind of a funny story. I have a good friend who lives up in Duluth. He owns a couple of restaurants up there, and he bought a house in a 900-year-old medieval village in Italy. And yeah, and he contacted me and said, "Hey, Wend, what a great place for you to write. Why don't you go on over?" I know. And I said, "Okay." And so I called my agent and I told her, I said, "Oh my God, I'm going to Italy for a month and I'm going to be living in this magnificent place. And I think I'm going to try to set a book there." So she went to my publisher and said, "Wendy's going to set a book in Italy." And then I get a call from my publisher. "I hear you're going to set a book in Italy. What's it about?" And I'm on the phone and I went, it's about a woman who goes to Italy and finds out she is descended from a long line of Italian witches. And my publisher said, "Awesome," sent me a book contract. So 5 minutes later, I had the contract. So I'm on the plane going to Italy, and I thought, I hope there's a tradition of witches in Italy, or I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be screwed. As it turned out, there is, and a pretty powerful one. And I've got a couple of examples if you want me to just babble on, but I got to the village, it's called Santo Stefano di Sassanio. And the doorways, everybody had these cute little brooms, little like whisk brooms above their doorway. And I thought, isn't that cute? That's a cute little decoration they do here. No, that is to ward off witches. That is to prevent witches from coming into your house. Everybody's got them over there. Then I'm sitting in this restaurant that is in the kitchen of this medieval castle where the Medicis live, and now there's a restaurant in there. And I'm sitting in there, and the bartender came over and started talking with me. He wanted to practice his English, and the word had gone around, American author in town, but nobody knew what I was writing about. And he pointed out the window. He said, "See that town right over there? It's this, that." And I looked, I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "You know what? You should go over there. It's just like this, only they're all witches over there." And I went, "What?" And it turns out that town has an annual witch festival on my birthday. Yes. And that's how I started the book. The book starts off with a depiction of that festival, and it ends with that too, actually. So yeah, that's my weird and witchy story about this novel. It was pretty wild.
That is amazing. That truly seems like a magical gift that was just handed to you.
I know, I know. And I said to my agent, I'm like, "I just pulled that idea out of thin air." And she said, "Wendy, your thin air is a little bit different than other people's thin air."
Yeah, this is like what all authors dream about, just the inspiration
It's inspiration.
hitting.
And it turns out, I really love this book, and I'm really glad people are loving it. It's something I've always wanted to do. I haven't written much in the way of magical realism before, and I love it. I just loved it. So it was a lot of fun.
We are going to move back to Sally. You handle a very large and comic cast of characters in Big in Sweden. It's a literal cast of characters because you're handling the cast of an entire TV show. And of course, we get to know each of them. And I thought you did such a good job making them all feel so specific and individual, even though you're juggling all of these characters. So I'm wondering how you approach character work and character making in this book and how you juggle this big cast of characters. And as a bonus question, who your favorite character was to write.
So this question is so fun, Emma, because I remember when I wrote my first book, I intentionally made the cast very small because I was terrified of writing a bunch of characters. I thought I couldn't do it. And somehow I ended up writing this book kicking and screaming, having this massive cast of characters. But one of the wonderful things about that is I feel like each character that I felt like I had to add for the sake of the story kind of grew my heart like 10 more sizes. Because my kind of empathy had to grow to encompass this additional person. And when you have a large cast of characters, or at least in my experience, it's impossible to make them all round, as we would say in creative writing classes. And there's kind of this myth that like a round character is good and a flat character is bad. But I think that gets in the way if you have a bad cast because it's not that simple. I think you can't give complex attributes to every single character. If, for example, I think there are probably like 10 to 15 kind of main characters in my book. So what I tried to do is just make each one immediately legible, where we wouldn't have to take long to be like, okay, I think I understand that. And then, what my job then as a writer is to complicate that legibility, even for the people that are only on screen or on the page for like a chapter or two. And there are characters who, don't stay on for very long. And by, second or third draft, I mean, I was just having a ball with these characters. I mean, I really do, I think of them as my friends. Like you ask this question, I'm like, oh man, I miss those guys, spending day in and day out with them. They really made me laugh. Like every time I would go over a scene, I was taking someone else's side. So I think it really gave me, it did so much for my relational intelligence to have that big cast. And I would say definitely hands down my favorite character in the book is Becky, who is Polly, the main character's nemesis at the beginning. And I won't, say what happens in the book, but she's a really complicated character to write. She has she owns her own business, but she doesn't consider herself a feminist. She has some political views that I really disagree with, but she's also super loyal and like sticks up for herself and sticks up for other people and in ways that Polly can't always in real time. Um, and I loved writing her because it helps remind me that, no one is just one thing. Even someone that, has political views right now that you just think are disgusting, doesn't mean that they're not incredible with animals or have a great sense of humor or, and I think trying to hold that when there's so many kind of profit-seeking organizations that are encouraging us to stay separate from one another. It was just really good for my heart. And yeah, love Becky to pieces.
Thank you. I will say as a reader, you love to hate to love Becky. Lindsay, your book, Monsters We Have Made, is told very compellingly, sort of interspersed and punctuated by what I would think of as like fictional ephemera. So like newspaper clippings, interviews, like scripts from podcasts. And I'm wondering at what point in the writing process did you know that the story had to be told like this, like using these sort of outside fictional sources? And how did you decide to use them?
Thank you, Emma. That's a great question. And I just want to say, yeah, before I answer it, I was thinking, Sally, of what you were saying about characters becoming so real. And I have had that experience as well. Like you'll spend all day working on a chapter and spending all this time with these characters. And then someone will say, do you want to do something tonight? And I'm like, no, I've been with people all day. Please, no. They were all in my head, but it's neither here nor there. But as for, yeah, the kind of found documents, fictional ephemera, Emma, you called it. Yeah, I always knew I wanted to have those elements. So over many drafts and many versions, those have always been there. I think I was inspired a long time ago by Tim O'Brien's In the Lake of the Woods, which is also kind of political literary thriller. It takes place in the North Woods, very dark. And he has these really cool sections of evidence where he has quotations and some are fictional and some are real and you don't really know what's what. And then, yeah, some chapters that are, he just calls hypothesis, where you're just trying to like, it's sort of in the conditional tense, what could have happened to this missing person. And I just loved that structure. I love the puzzle of it and the mystery. And so I found that very inspiring. So I knew I wanted these, I knew I wanted this kind of puzzle feel. I also just really like writing in many different voices, and this gave me the chance to do that. There were a lot more kind of first person point of view perspective characters in the novel until editors were like, it's too many, cut it down. But the little page long or half page long other voices were enjoyable to write. And I think thematically, I also really wanted to emphasize what's on the record, kind of the facts that we think we know. And then there's everything that exists outside that, and everything else is conjecture and mystery and imagination. And so, kind of where is that boundary between what we know, which is actually so very little, any of us in our sphere, and then everything that exists outside of it, everything that could be there, all of the questions that remain unanswered. So having those kind of sections of facts enabled me to play more with sort of the dream, vision, fiction element of some of the other sections. So it was fun.
Thank you. It was really fun to read, in part because you're so good at being polyvocal. And so I was really excited each time one of those found footage, I don't know what you call them, but yeah, I loved it. Well, Wendy, for your second question, you partially answered it a little bit because your novel takes place, it has alternating sort of like a braided storyline and timelines. It takes place in the present day and then also in several different historical timelines.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about the kind of research that you did both for the present day. Sounds like you had a writing retreat in a witch town.
No, it's
And also for the history, the historical timelines of this book. Like, how did you research that?
Usually I don't research for my books because, well, A, I'm lazy, and B, I like to make things up. But for this one, I wanted to be a little careful, and so I spent a lot of time just browsing online and looking up Italian history, and there's an event in the book that really happened, which I won't reveal, but it's kind of a cataclysmic event that really did happen. I researched that. And there's also, I had this vision of, so it's told, we learn the stories of 3 or 4 generations of women. And I had the idea that I wanted one of them in the past to be married to a Black man. I just had this kind of vision of it. And I thought, well, this is the 1700s, and what was it like? Was there discrimination in Italy? And I found these writings by a Black professor from Louisiana who actually was in Italy at that time and teaching. And so I put him in there. I based that character on that guy. So I researched more than I usually do.
Okay, well, thank you so much to all of our tremendous genre fiction finalists, and also to all of you who are watching for taking part in this Meet the Finalists panel. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find a treasure trove of past events archived on the YouTube channel of the Minnesota Book Awards steward organization, the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. You can find out more about future programs on their website, thefriends.org. Great to the point website. Gotta love that. And in particular, please mark your calendars for Tuesday, April 22nd. That is the evening that the winner in this category and 9 other categories are finally revealed. Please join us in St. Paul at the Ordway Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets are $29, inclusive of processing fees. A free live stream will also be available. You can visit thefriends.org/MNBA for details. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I hope to see you at the award ceremony.